So when we look at individuals that we're grass finishing and we want to make sure that we've got an adequate degree of finish, we've got a couple of heifers here that are very good to just use as a visual appraisal of where we're at, what we're looking for on a well-finished animal, and how to determine that. So if we look across this animal here, the white face animal here from front to rear, one of the things that we're looking for is we're looking for the degree of fat cover across the ribs. So every beef animal has a total of 26 ribs, 13 on each side, and the forequarter is divided from the hindquarter in the packing plant between the 12th and 13th rib. So what we want to see on a very well finished animal is a nice spongy fat cover going across every rib all the way back through the 13th rib. So if we can visibly still see a rib, even though they may have a fair amount of cover on them, they're still not fully finished. So in particular, you'll see that 11th, 12th, 13th rib on animals that are not quite finished yet. So her ribs, 11th, 12th, and 13th are still visible, so she still needs a little bit of time. If we look across the top of these cattle, then we want to see a nice smooth top to a well-finished animal. If they are not anywhere near finished, what you'll find is you can oftentimes see the spinous processes sticking up or sharpness to that top line, and what you're visibly seeing is the skeletal structure of those spinous processes of the vertebrae. So again, a very smooth turn over the top is indicative of animals that are more well finished. And on a lot of animals that have a lot of back fat cover to them, they'll even have an indentation going down the top line, the center of the top line, and we call that a butterfly top. So that's another indication that an animal is carrying a very good degree of finish. Then what I also want to see is I want to see a lot of depth in the heart girth, right behind the front legs. We want to see that girth very deep. If they're still sort of pinched up and tight in that heart girth and they haven't put on enough fat yet to be fully ready for harvest. And likewise, we want to see depth in the flank area, so just in front of the hind legs there. So in that flank and the heart girth, we want to see a lot of depth, and obviously a lot of depth to the barrel in between the girth and the flank. Next, we want to look at the level of fill between the hooks and the pins, so that back pelvic skeletal structure of the cattle. On animals that are not as well finished, the hooks and the pins will be much more prominent. You'll see skeletal sharpness there, but on animals that are very well finished, they're going to have a really good degree of feel spreading from the hooks to the pins and giving you a nice smooth appearance over both of those prominent skeletal structures. Then we also like to see, if it's a heifer, we'll see some fullness in the udder. They'll lay down some udder fat as they get fully finished. And so we'll be able to see a little bit of distension and fullness in that udder that indicates that they've laid down a nice layer of fat. And then the final two things that we look for in that final phase of finishing, when we view the animals from the rear, we're looking for poning of fat around the tail head. So it almost looks like somebody took an air pump and inserted a needle under the skin and pumped in puffs of air under the skin on either side of the tail head. So it's just pones or little puffs of fat that are projecting out from both the right side and the left side of the tail head. That's one of the final places that animals will deposit fat when they're fully finished. And then the other cue that we look for in a very well finished animal, particularly in that final phase when we know they're really done and they can't do any more, is the brisket. So I'm going to try to turn one of these heifers so that we can actually view her brisket and take a look at what we're trying to look at there. So you can see this girl is starting to develop a little depth and a little width in her brisket. And that's what we want to see in these animals as they start to get fully finished. Have the pones of fat around the tail head. Her 11th, 12th, 13th rib aren't completely covered yet, and a nice spongy fat cover. So when I look at those 3 primary points, I know that she needs at least another 100 to 150 pounds on her to be a fully finished animal and to reach her genetic potential in degree of finish before she were to be harvested. Now, for a fully finished animal, that brisket is going to be very deep, wide, and is going to stretch from basically just back of the dewlap of the heifer all the way behind her front legs, or what we would term her elbows. So we want to see a brisket that also has some length to it in terms of fat deposit. So wide, deep, and length with that fat deposit. It almost, for a very well finished animal, that brisket almost looks out of place. It looks like it's too big to fit the animal, but that's what we're looking for when an animal is truly finished. And once we see that type of brisket coupled with the poning around the tail head, they're done. They're not, if you continue to graze them, they're not going to put on really any appreciably more back fat or deposit any more appreciable marbling. They are ready for harvest at that point.